this video, we will focus on the internationalization module, which provides an overview, of course, of international strategic decisions. And let's start by realizing that some countries are more competitive than others in specific industries. Okay? So Germans, for instance, are very strong in the car industry and in some kind of heavy equipment industry. Japanese are also good in those, and in a few other businesses. Americans, Portuguese, Finnish, Brazilians, you all have some industries where some countries are very, very competitive. And the question is why? Why is it like this? And to understand why, we're going to use the National Diamond Model. The diamond model is based on 4 criteria. That's why it's called diamond. So it's a shape, so supposedly, of a diamond. And it considers 4, let's say, basic conditions that, if they are met, will help this country be very competitive in a certain industry. So the factor conditions, the demand conditions for products from that industry, the related and supporting industries for that industry, as well as the kind of firm strategy, structure, and rivalry that is taking place in that industry, in that country. On top of that, on the sidelines, so to speak, you also have the action of chance, discovery of raw materials like oil, gas, or lithium, for instance, for electric batteries, and of course the government ruling, legislation, incentives, and so on. These 2 impact on the 4 other pillars, the key pillars of the national competitiveness. But over time, it's those 4 elements of the national diamond that really drive the competitiveness of a country. Okay? So let's take a closer look at those 4. First, the factor conditions. We're looking at the availability of particularly specialized and advanced resources necessary for the development of those industries. Of course, in most countries have general resources like people or some raw materials, basic raw materials, but the specialized factors such as highly qualified technicians or advanced resources such as some technologies, some know-how, those are the ones that make the factor conditions very high and help any country become more competitive. Right? Then the demand conditions. What's interesting here is not so much the volume of the local demand, of the country's demand, but more the nature of the domestic demand. So if the domestic demand is very demanding, very sophisticated, local competitors will be forced to upgrade their competencies, right, to meet the high levels of demand from their customers, from their country customers. And by doing so, they become more competitive to also meet the needs of other countries' customers. The related and supporting industries speaks for itself. So if in my country there are internationally competitive suppliers and companies to outsource, then of course that will make my industry stronger and stronger. If on the other hand there are not so many strong suppliers with good technologies and strong know-how, then of course my industry won't be able to compete so strongly. And last but not least, in the 4 pillars, we have the firm strategy, structural, and rivalry. So the way companies compete has a huge impact. If they compete in a country, if they compete through innovation, through technological upgrades, through quality, and so on, then they will push each other to higher levels of international competitiveness. If, on the other hand, they compete on low quality, low price, they bring each other down because internationally they will not be able to compete so well. Okay? So these 4 pillars must be well developed for a country to be strong in a given industry. And of course, this means that you can look at an industry that is very competitive in a country and try to understand why did this happen. Take the shoe industry in Portugal. Portugal is not a big manufacturer of shoes. Of course, China is the leading country, Brazil is also very strong, but the Portuguese shoes have achieved an extremely high level of international competitiveness. Nowadays, the average price of Portuguese shoes is the second in the world, only after Italian shoes and already above French shoes. We're talking about the average price. Now, of course, the average price has to reflect the quality, right? So that means that Portuguese shoes have improved in terms of design, material quality, and so on, to a level that allowed them to increase their prices and be the second highest priced in the world. Okay, how did this happen, right? Well, in terms of factor conditions, we have many small and medium-sized shoe manufacturers that don't have that much money, and they're relatively weak in terms of sales. So that's already a surprise. However, the workers are mostly young workers, versatile, able to work with digital equipment, and many of them are actually coming from the apparel, from the garment, from the clothing business, which has a strong design input, of course. So they're bringing design, modern design trends to the shoes. And they're being supported by the technological center of the shoe industry called CTCP, so that's Centro Tecnológico de Calçado de Portugal, which means a technological center just for the shoe industry. And those guys have been doing a great job of training these young people and stylists to help them develop better designs and better understand the trends. Okay, then comes the demand conditions. Now, once again, Portugal is not a large country in terms of demand, only 10 million customers. But what's interesting is that the Portuguese population is used to leather shoes and leather soles. Okay, that's something that we got used to culturally. And internationally, leather soles and leather shoes are high quality shoes. So Portuguese are not so much into cheap shoes and cheap materials. We mostly have been used to leather shoes. And internationally, this has helped the Portuguese manufacturers to address the high quality demands of other countries. Okay? When it comes to related and supporting industries, we're not very strong there. We have to import specialized manufacturing equipment, but we have a close relationship to the raw materials, in this case leather, and other kinds of raw materials, so that helps. But the media specialized in shoes is not strong. There are not so strong fashion shows related to shoes, so we have to go abroad to present our shoes in fairs such as in Italy and other parts of the world. When it comes to the firm strategy, structure, and rivalry, it's interesting to realize that the association for the shoe industry, APICAPS, has over the last many years promoted a focus on quality, innovation, design, getting together to go to the international fairs instead of fighting it out and destroying each other's margins through price competition. So that has helped a lot. Another aspect that is interesting is that most shoe companies are concentrated in just 2 areas of the country, so that develops a cluster. So people who are working in one place may want to move to another company, and they bring knowledge to each other. And that helps flourish the knowledge in all of them. Okay? Very well. Government has provided incentives, but other governments have also provided incentives, so that was not the key deciding issue. And in terms of chance, the fast fashion emergence has been advantageous to Portuguese manufacturers because it has increased the importance of close-by suppliers, whereas Chinese manufacturers or Brazilians are more far away from at least European markets. So the fast fashion requires close-by relationships and very fast deliveries. But the four pillars were there and were benefited by this chance. Okay? Something that is quite interesting is to realize that in those countries where you have very competitive industries, typically you find clusters. Clusters are a combination of industries that eventually allow one or two industries to be very competitive worldwide. Okay, so in Denmark, for instance, you have the fermented insulin and the fermented enzymes, which are based on lots of other industries, dairy, beer industry, pork, and so on, which combine technology and know-how to develop those two, fermented insulin and fermented enzymes. And as I mentioned already in the Portuguese case, in many situations you have close by clusters. So these companies are close by. Take the wine industry in California, which is clearly a cluster. You have the growers, the vineyards, and you have the wineries and processing facilities, and you have close by clusters and close by industries. You have the agriculture cluster in California, which, as you know, is very strong. The tourism cluster, which goes without saying, is also very strong. And the food and catering cluster, also a very competitive cluster in California with lots of events and so on. So therefore, the competitiveness of all these clusters actually help the wine business also become quite competitive. So what we're going to check in the first exercise is the national diamond model of the country, of the case studies company. So we're not going to look at the company, we're going to look at the country where the company comes from. I'm going to check if the conditions in the original country actually helped this company become very competitive. In some cases, companies are competitive thanks to the support of the home country. But in other cases, companies are very competitive despite the not so good conditions in the home country. So that's what we're going to check first. And then we're going to look at the internationalization countries, of course. Outside of the home country, how can we decide in which countries should we move in? Okay, so once again, we have to have some kind of criteria. And you may recall the formula that can also be applied to countries. So the sales, the growth, the margin, the risk, and the sustainability, and an overall assessment. To make it easier for you, there's another Excel file with all these factors and lots of more detail for you to understand how to apply this to any country. Okay? But what matters is that you realize, there's a structured way to assess the attractiveness of different countries, just as you did to assess the attractiveness of different segments, customer segments. Now that I understand that some countries are more attractive than others, are better, for instance, for sales, and others are better for production, now it's time to decide how to enter the market, right? And you can enter the market through transactions. There would be, for instance, exports. Spot exports means I just sell it once, I have a surplus of something, so I'll just sell it on the market. Medium to long-term export means I do it regularly. I export to those markets regularly. And I can even have some agents or distributors. So some intermediaries which help me penetrate that market. And I can also have licensing. Licensing can take place through normal licensing agreements, brand licensing, technology licensing, but it can also take place as franchising, which is a whole solution of management practices, including the brand typically, that are licensed to individual partners in other countries. Okay? For instance, in the retail business, companies such as Benetton have been working through franchising by having partners in different countries, and they have to fulfill several requirements to be able to sell Benetton clothes under the Benetton brand. Another option, instead of just transactions, is to actually invest and to move inside those markets through joint ventures or through subsidiaries. So if I have more than 80% of the equity of a company, that makes it a subsidiary. If I have less than 80%, So some partner or partners have at least 20% of the equity. That means it's a joint venture. Okay. And I can have a joint venture focused just on distribution or marketing, so more sales oriented, or I can even have a joint venture or a subsidiary focused on the whole company value chain. So including R&D, including operations, including marketing, of course, and so on. Okay, so for instance, Lego has been working in many countries, setting up their own plants in some of them. So there they have their subsidiaries, including China, for instance, their own subsidiary in China, while in other countries they just export from the places where they have operational activities. Okay. One other way to internationalize is through projects. Now, projects means that this is a temporary internationalization. Can be a turnkey project, which means I'm going to, for instance, build a factory and prepare everything, train the people, put in the machines, get the distribution ready, and at the end, give the key to the company that asked me to build this factory, and they just need to turn the key to start working, so to speak. So these are mainly B2B situations, right? BOT project stands for build, operate, transfer. So for instance, a country wants to build a bridge over some river, and instead of doing it on their own, they can hire external companies from the country or from other parts of the world, and they develop BOT projects, build, operate, transfer, which means they build the bridge, they operate the bridge through the toll fares, they charge some money for anybody who wants to cross the bridge, and after, let's say, 25 years, they transfer the property of the bridge to the government of that country. Okay? And you also have management contracts. That's another way to internationalize. So you have, for instance, a hotel chain, and you're moving into new countries, but you don't want to invest in real estate. You don't want to have, let's say, the building of the hotel. So you can just provide the management of that building, of that hotel. Okay? So Marriott hotels, for instance, many of them are using buildings that are rented, and then everything looks like a typical Marriott hotel, the management, the logos, all the facilities, but actually it's a management contract only. Okay? Very well. To decide which of these options to choose, you should consider various criteria, of course. There are constraints. Sometimes the legal framework does not allow you to have subsidiaries. You have to have partnerships, like India, for instance, throughout many years. Market access. If you want to have strong market access, maybe export is not enough. Maybe you should have an agent or a distributor. Experience. If you don't have experience, you better start with export instead of investing immediately. If the competition in that country is very strong, maybe it's better to develop a joint venture over there to compete directly with that company instead of just exporting, because the competition will try to avoid your exports, will try to combat your exports. If it's a very risky country, like for instance Russia, maybe you're going to just export. You're not going to do investments. If you want to have full control, then you're going to do, for instance, investments or projects. If you want to make sure that you get the return, for instance, you have to think about how those local currencies will be able to be changed into your own currency, right? And sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes there are some limitations. So you want to make sure that you get the return of your investment. And some assets cannot be exported. So you cannot export, let's say, some more complex construction products. So you have to go there and do it there, right? Of course, costs. You have to think about costs of going into some countries and others. How many resources do you have? How many people can you send abroad? Can you just buy locally those companies? But then you have to integrate cultures. It's not so easy. And even the products. Some products are easy to export. Others need to be built directly there, like the bridge, for instance. Okay, so these are constraints that you should take into consideration when deciding how to export and where to, how to internationalize and where to internationalize. In this analysis, of course, you're going to check two types of advantages. Country advantages, okay, if I go to that country, there's lots of advantages of being there. It's a large country, very attractive, or it has strong competition, so I want to move in where I can learn the most dealing with strong competition, or there's, there are some new technologies developing there, so I want to be close to those technologies. So those would be country advantages. But you can also, and you should also take in consideration, your own firm advantages, your own company's advantages. So when you combine them, of course, you realize that some markets are more strategic and you should move in there with your own subsidiaries because you have high firm advantages and the country is also very attractive. But if the country is not very attractive or doesn't have that many advantages and you're not very strong in that country, maybe you just do some transactions, some exports, and maybe some projects, not really investing money. You see? So your analysis should balance your own capabilities as well as the country's advantages. And once you decide to internationalize to many countries or a few, you can now decide also how to manage the integration of those various countries where you're already working. So you can have, let's say, a very global approach, and it's pretty much the same kind of product for all the world. That would be the example in the ice cream industry of Ben & Jerry's. Okay, pretty much the same tastes or few variations for the whole world. But you can also have an adaptation of the brand and the portfolio to different countries. That would be the Unilever approach, where they have different brands, Walls, Algida, Kibon, and so on, for different countries. They don't have one single brand. They have many brands, each for one or two countries. Okay? And the portfolio of ice creams being sold can also differ somewhat between countries. So that would be a multinational company, multinational. Of course, the trend has been towards transnational companies, which have a focus on combining the adaptation to the local needs, so local responsiveness, but also integration of resources. And Nestlé would be a good example. They have the same brand all over, and the portfolio changes a bit, but doesn't change much throughout the world, allowing them to have a unified approach. And last but not least, you can have a local company that just exports its products to other countries without any adaptation, without any integration between countries, because there's just one country. It's from here to your country, right? So this would be the Santini ice creams, for instance, which are made in one location and exported to other countries without any adaptation. Very well, so this leads us to the last exercise here, focusing on the internationalization of the case study company. What would you consider to be the best modes for this company in terms of transactions, investments, and projects? Do they apply to this case study company? And what are the constraints? What are the key constraints that should be considered? So there's a list there, and you can just take out the ones that don't apply. So think about what are the most relevant constraints to support, to kind of drive the internationalization of this company. Very well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm looking forward to applying these topics to the case study. Thank you.